The Israeli West Bank barrier is a separation barrier built by the Israeli government in the West Bank or along the 1949 Armistice Line. Upon completion, its total length will be about 700 kilometers and include on the western side about 9.4% of the West Bank and 23,000 Palestinians. The Israeli government argues that it protects civilians from suicide bombings and other terror attacks that increased significantly during the Second Intifada. Between 2000 and July 2003, 73 suicide bombings were carried out from the West Bank. However, from August 2003 to the end of 2006, only 12 attacks were carried out. Barrier opponents claim it seeks to annex Palestinian land under the guise of security and undermines peace negotiations by unilaterally establishing new borders. Opponents object to a route that in some places substantially deviates eastward from the Green Line, severely restricts the travel of many Palestinians and impairs their ability to commute to work within the West Bank or to Israel. Names in Hebrew, descriptions include separation fence, Geder HaHafreda, separation wall and security fence. In Arabic, it is called Wall of Apartheid, Jidar al-Fasl al-Unshuri. In English, the BBC's Style Guide uses the terms barrier as does The Economist, PBS and The New York Times. The Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs uses the phrase security fence in English. The International Court of Justice has used the term wall, explaining the other expressions sometimes employed are no more accurate if understood in the physical sense. It is also referred to as the apartheid wall or apartheid fence in a derogatory manner. Seam zone refers to the land between the 1949 Armistice Agreement line and the fence. Structure. About 90 to 95% of the barrier will be constructed as a multi-layered fence system, with the IDF's preferred design having 3 fences, pyramid-shaped stacks of barbed wire on the 2 outer fences, a lighter-weight fence with intrusion detection equipment in the middle, an anti-vehicle ditch, patrol roads on both sides, and a smooth strip of sand for intrusion tracking. The barrier contains an on average 60-meter wide exclusion area. The width of some sections is larger, due to topographic conditions. The width of some sections is 3 meters where the barrier is constructed as a concrete wall up to 8 meters high. These sections are narrower, require less land, and provide more protection against snipers. Wall construction is more common in urban settings, e.g., Kalkia and Jerusalem, and in areas where people have been killed by snipers, e.g., the Trans-Israel Highway route. The barrier runs partly along or near the 1949 Jordanian-Israeli Armistice Line and partly through the West Bank, diverging eastward from the Armistice Line by up to 20 kilometers to include on the western side several of the highly populated areas of Israeli settlement such as East Jerusalem, Ariel, Gush Etzion, Emmanuel, Karnai Shomron, Givat Zev, Oronit, and Ma'ale Adumim. The barrier nearly encircles some Palestinian towns, about 20% follows the Armistice Line, and a projected 77,000 hectares, or about 13.5%. of the West Bank area is on the west side of the wall. According to a study of the April 2006 route by the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem, 8.5% of the West Bank area will after completion be on the Israeli side of the barrier, and 3.4% partly or completely surrounded on the eastern side. Some 27,520 to 31,000 Palestinians will be captured on the Israeli side. Another 124,000, on the other hand, will effectively be controlled and isolated. Some 230,000 Palestinians in Jerusalem will be placed on the West Bank side. Most of the barrier was built at the northern and western edges of the West Bank, mostly beyond the Green Line, and created 9 enclaves, which enclosed 15,783 hectares. An additional barrier, circa 10 kilometers long, runs south of Ramallah. Israel states that the topography does not permit putting the barrier along the Green Line in some places because hills or tall buildings on the Palestinian side would make the barrier ineffective against terrorism. By contrast, the International Court of Justice states that in such cases it is only legal to build the barrier inside Israel. The barrier route has been challenged in court and changed several times. Argument presented to the court has reiterated that the ceasefire line of 1949 was negotiated without prejudice to future territorial settlements or boundary lines. Timeline. In 1992, the idea of creating a physical barrier separating the Israeli and Palestinian populations was proposed by then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. In 1994, a first barrier was constructed along the Green Line between Bat Hefer and Tulkarm. In 1995, the Shahal Commission was established to discuss how to implement a separation barrier. In 2000, Prime Minister Ehud Barak approved financing of a 74 km fence between the Wadi Ara region and Latrun. On 23 June 2002, the Ariel Sharon government definitely approved the plan in principle. By 2003, 180 kilometers had been completed, and in 2004, Israel started the southern part of the barrier. By 2006, 362 kilometers of the barrier had been completed, 88 kilometers was under construction, and 253 kilometers had not yet been started. By 2012, 440 kilometers of the barrier had been completed, 57 kilometers was under construction, and 212 kilometers had not yet been started, with little progress made by 2014. In September 2014, the government voted to not reauthorize the barrier in the Gush Etzion area. Effectiveness. Suicide bombings have decreased since the construction of the barrier. Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, Hamas, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad have been less able to conduct attacks in Israel, which have decreased in areas where the barrier has been completed. The Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Israel Security Agency report that in 2002, there were 452 fatalities from terrorist attacks. Before the completion of the first continuous segment from the beginning of the Second Intifada, 73 Palestinian suicide bombings were carried out from the West Bank, killing 293 Israelis and injuring over 1,900. After the completion of the first continuous segment through the end of 2006, there were only 12 attacks based in the West Bank, killing 64 people and wounding 445. Terrorist attacks declined in 2007 and 2008 to 9 in 2010. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs predicts that completion of the barrier will continue to prevent terrorist attacks since an absolute halt in terrorist activities has been noticed in the West Bank areas where the fence has been constructed. Israeli officials quoted in the newspaper Maariv have said that in the areas where the barrier was complete, the number of hostile infiltrations has decreased to almost zero. Maariv also stated that Palestinian militants, including a senior member of Islamic Jihad, had confirmed that the barrier made it much harder to conduct attacks inside Israel. Since the completion of the fence in the area of Tulkarm and Kalklia in June 2003, there have been no successful attacks from those areas. All attacks were intercepted or the suicide bombers detonated prematurely. In a March 23, 2008 interview, Palestinian Islamic Jihad leader Ramadan Shallah complained to the Qatari newspaper Al-Sharq that the separation barrier limits the ability of the resistance to arrive deep within Israeli territory to carry out suicide bombing attacks. But the resistance has not surrendered or become helpless, and is looking for other ways to cope with the requirements of every stage of the Intifada. Other factors are also cited as causes for the decline. According to Haaretz, A 2006 report by the Shin Bet concluded that he fence does make it harder for them terrorists, but that attacks in 2005 decreased due to increased pursuing of Palestinian militants by the Israeli army and intelligence organizations, Hamas's increased political activity, and a truce among Palestinian militant groups in the Palestinian territories. Haaretz reported, his security fence is no longer mentioned as the major factor in preventing suicide bombings, mainly because the terrorists have found ways to bypass it. Former Israeli Secretary of Defense Moshe Aaron says that the reduction in Palestinian violence is largely due to the IDF's entry into the West Bank in 2002. Effects on Palestinians. The barrier has many effects on Palestinians, including reduced freedoms, reduction of the number of Israel Defense Forces checkpoints and road closures, loss of land, increased difficulty in accessing medical and educational services in Israel, restricted access to water sources, and economic effects. Reduced freedoms. In a 2005 report, the United Nations stated that it is difficult to overstate the humanitarian impact of the barrier. The route inside the West Bank severs communities, people's access to services, livelihoods and religious and cultural amenities. In addition, plans for the barrier's exact route and crossing points through it are often not fully revealed until days before construction commences. This has led to considerable anxiety amongst Palestinians about how their future lives will be impacted. The land between the barrier and the Green Line constitutes some of the most fertile in the West Bank. It is currently the home for 49,400 West Bank Palestinians living in 38 villages and towns. An often quoted example of the effects of the barrier is the Palestinian town of Kalklia, a city of around 45,000, which is surrounded almost on all sides by the barrier. One 8-meter-high concrete section of this wall follows the Green Line between the city and the nearby Trans-Israel Highway. According to the BBC, this section, referred to as an anti-sniper wall, is intended to prevent gun attacks against Israeli motorists on the Trans-Israel Highway. The city is accessible through a military checkpoint on the main road from the east, and an underground tunnel built in September 2004 on the south side connects Kalklia with the adjacent village of Abla. In 2005, the Israeli Supreme Court ordered the government to change the route of the barrier in this area to ease movement of Palestinians between Kalklia and 5 surrounding villages. In the same ruling, the court rejected the arguments that the fence must be built only on the Green Line. The ruling cited the topography of the terrain, security considerations, and Sections 43 and 52 of the Hague Regulations 1907 and Article 53 of the Fourth Geneva Convention as reasons for this rejection. In early October 2003, the IDF-OC Central Command declared the area between the separation barrier in the northern section of the West Bank and the Green Line a closed military area for an indefinite period. New directives stated that every Palestinian over the age of 12 living in the enclaves created in the closed area have to obtain a permanent resident permit from the civil administration to enable them to continue to live in their homes. Other residents of the West Bank have to obtain special permits to enter the area. Fewer checkpoints and roadblocks. In June 2004, The Washington Times reported that the reduced Israeli military incursions in Jenin have prompted efforts to rebuild damaged streets and buildings, and a gradual return to a semblance of normality. And in a letter dated October 25, 2004, from the Israeli mission to Kofi Annan, Israel's government pointed out that a number of restrictions east of the barrier have been lifted as a result of it, including a reduction in checkpoints from 71 to 47 and roadblocks from 197 to 111. The Jerusalem Post reports that, for some Palestinians who are Israeli citizens living in the Israeli Arab town of El-Fam near Jenin, the barrier has significantly improved their lives because, on one hand, it prevents would-be thieves or terrorists from coming to their town and, on the other hand, has increased the flow of customers from other parts of Israel who would normally have patronized Palestinian business in the West Bank, resulting in an economic boom. The report states that the downsides are that the barrier has divided families in half and damaged Israeli Arabs' solidarity with the Palestinians living on the other side of the Green Line. A UN report released in August 2005 observed that the existence of the barrier replaced the need for closures. Movement within the northern West Bank, for example, is less restrictive where the barrier has been constructed. Physical obstacles have also been removed in Ramallah and Al-Bia Governorate and Jerusalem Governorate where the barrier is under construction. The report says that more freedom of movement in rural areas may ease Palestinian access to hospitals and schools, but also says that restrictions on movement between urban population centers have not significantly changed. Loss of land. Parts of the barrier are built on land seized from Palestinians, or between Palestinians and their lands. In a 2009 report, the UN said that the most recent barrier route allocates more segments to be built on the Green Line itself compared to previous draft routes of the barrier. However, in its current route, the barrier is annexing 9.5% of the total area of the West Bank to the Israeli side of the barrier. In early 2003, 63 shops straddling the Green Line were demolished by the IDF during construction of the wall in the village of Nazlitissa. In August 2003, an additional 115 shops and stalls and 5 to 7 homes there were also demolished. According to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, 15 communities were to be directly affected, numbering about 138,593 Palestinians, including 13,450 refugee families, or 67,250 individuals. In addition to loss of land, in the city of Kalkia, 1/3 of the city's water wells lie on the other side of the barrier. The Israeli Supreme Court says the Israeli government's rejection of accusations of a de facto annexation of these wells, stating that the construction of the fence does not affect the implementation of the water agreements determined in the agreement. The United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia estimates that in the north of the West Bank about 80% of Palestinians who own land on the other side of the barrier have not received permits from the Israeli authorities, and hence cannot cultivate their fields. Israel has built a barrier in the Jordan Valley near the Jordanian border. A plan to build another barrier between the West Bank and the Jordan Valley was abandoned because of international condemnation after the 2004 International Court ruling, instead instituting a restrictive permit regime for Palestinians. However, it has changed the route to allow settlements to annex parcels of land. The existing barrier cuts off access to the Jordan River for Palestinian farmers in the West Bank. Israeli settlement councils already have de facto control of 86% of the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea as the settler population steadily grows there. In 2013, Ehud Barak, Israeli defense minister at the time, proposed that Israel should consider unilateral disengagement from the West Bank and the dismantling of settlements beyond the separation barrier, but maintain a military presence in the Jordan Valley along the West Bank-Jordan border. Health and Medical Services Médecins du Monde, the Palestinian Red Crescent Society and Physicians for Human Rights Israel have stated that the barrier harms West Bank health. Upon completion of the construction, the organizations predict the barrier would prevent over 130,000 Palestinian children from being immunized. deny more than 100,000 pregnant women access to health care in Israel. In addition, almost a third of West Bank villages will suffer from lack of access to health care. After completion, many residents may lose complete access to emergency care at night. In towns near Jerusalem, for example, average time for an ambulance to travel to the nearest hospital has increased from 10 minutes to over 110 minutes. A report from Physicians for Human Rights Israel states that the barrier imposes almost total separation on the hospitals from the population they are supposed to serve. The report also said that patients from the West Bank visiting Jerusalem's Palestinian clinics declined by half from 2002 to 2003. Economic changes in 2013. The World Bank cited estimates of costs to the West Bank economy attributable to barriers, combined with checkpoints and movement permits, of USD $185 million and $229 million. Foreign Affairs contributor David Makovsky estimated the number of West Bank Palestinians who lived on the Israeli side in 2004 as fewer than 1%, but noted that a larger number living in enclaves like Kalklia adjacent to the fence were also adversely affected. The Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem says that thousands of Palestinians have difficulty going to their fields and marketing their produce. In other areas of the West Bank, farming is a primary source of income in the Palestinian communities situated along the barrier's route, an area that constitutes one of the most fertile areas in the West Bank.